We want to turn now to Ethiopia because for about a year now, the conflict in the Tigray region of Ethiopia has continued. Millions of people have been displaced and thousands face what some are calling the worst hunger crisis in a decade. But what is the real story behind the story? How did a country that seemed to be conflict-free suddenly find itself in the middle of a rebellion? Journalist Hermela Aregawi joins us now from Los Angeles. She is an old friend. And Hermela, first of all, without naming organizations, you maintain that somehow we are getting this wrong. And my old friend Randall Robinson said, when you see Africa, always follow the money, follow the weapons. What are we getting wrong about this conflict?
So yeah, Del, much of the Western media is getting it wrong, and I gather it's because they're doing the bidding of the U.S. government. The U.S. government for a long time had a relationship with TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front. They were once rebels during the communist government, and they were backed by the West to come into power for about 27 years, ending in 2018. And it seems that a lot of the Western media is supporting the rebels' narrative because the U.S. wants to support them because that's their way into power. But the majority of the Ethiopian people have said they do not want that group to be in power. They have voted for the current prime minister. So it seems logical that the U.S. should support the wishes of the majority of Ethiopians as opposed to supporting a rebel group that has been fighting the government as well as the Ethiopian people for the last year, and it's been devastating.
You are not the first person of Ethiopian descent that I have heard that same story from. But that being the case, why do you think it is that we are being misled on this particular story? I mean, some of the people that you're talking about are very good journalists. I know them just as well as I know you. So what makes you think you're right and they're wrong?
So I happen to be of the ethnic group that TPLF claims to represent. They originated 40 years ago saying they were going to liberate the Tigrayan people from the communist regime, but they have strayed away from their goal of liberating the Tigrayan people. Tigray is still very much poor. There's not a whole lot that they've done for the very region itself. And it seems to me, I'm actually an outlier among Tigrayans to be able to speak out and say this narrative is not true. The narrative that the West continues to weave is we're so tribalist that we are killing each other because of the ethnicity that we were born into, when in reality it's not true. Many of us are intermarried. Much of my family is from different ethnicities, and also the Western media seems to want to paint the Ethiopian government as this savage government. Most recently with the airstrikes, they were pushing the narrative that they were targeting civilians when in fact they were targeting military armaments within the Tigray region. And so it just seems to be trying to weave that age-old story that Africa is just destined to be in war, destined to have famine. The issue with the famine narrative as well is the Western media has been warning about famine for the last year, but they ignored the very things that could lead to famine, which is that humanitarian aid has been redirected to war. 7 UN officials have been kicked out by the Ethiopian government. 2 UN whistleblowers have backed this idea that rogue UN officials are actually helping arm the rebel group that is fighting the majority of Ethiopians and the Ethiopian government. So it seems to me not a genuine effort to actually help the people, but to actually fuel the very war that has killed tens of thousands and displaced millions at this point.
So, Hermela, you and I, as I indicated, have known each other for a long time. You're smart. Where does this end?
You know, I think it's up to the Ethiopian government to end it militarily. Unfortunately, I'm actually so anti-war, but because the armed rebels have continued to move into other regions and so many people have died because of it, it seems like they are not going to give in unless they do give up, and some of the politicians that were not a part of starting this war get to the negotiating table and try to have a diplomatic conversation. But as long as the armed rebels are fighting, the Ethiopian government is going to continue to fight them just like any government would. Del, this is an example that might actually help your audience understand what this is. It's like the insurrectionists back in January. If they had attacked like they did a government entity, and in this case a military post, which is what the TPLF attacked. And then when the government actually fought them back, every time one of them died, they would say this is a genocide of insurrectionists. Right? That's essentially the narrative that the Western media is asking us to believe about Ethiopia. So would you stop and negotiate with the insurrectionists? likely not. You would defeat them militarily, which is what the Ethiopian government is doing. So hopefully that this will come to a close sooner than later.